This is 7th Generation Warfare, and I'm your current host, John Nelson. In this episode, we'll be continuing to look at Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication number 1, Warfighting. We just finished Chapter 1, which was the nature of war, and now we are entering Chapter 2, which is the theory of war. And so it starts, having arrived at a common view of the nature of war, we proceed to develop from it a theory of war. Our theory of war will in turn be the foundation for the way we prepare and wage war. And in Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1, then the third and fourth chapter are preparing for war and waging war. So you can see the progression. This chapter, or segment of the chapter, is titled War as an Act of Policy. War is an extension of both policy and politics with the addition of military force. Policy and politics are related but not synonymous, and it is important to understand war in both contexts. Politics refers to the distribution of power through dynamic interaction, both cooperative and competitive, while policy refers to the conscious objectives established within the political process. So I would generally, I define politics as the art of trying to influence others, but that's not how they define it here. So looking at their definition of politics, politics refers to the distribution of power through dynamic interaction, both competitive and cooperative. So they're focused on power, and being third generation warfare, which is about violence, I can understand why they're focused on power and power dynamic. And you can think of heads of state and military generals are very powerful people. They have a lot of force that they can wield. Realistically, they know that they can get people to do things. So that's the type of power they're talking about. In 7th generation warfare, I'd be looking more at the power to exercise one's will. So, you know, from just a sheer having, whether it's provided by financial security or not, just having the capability to pursue one's interests in life. Certainly wealth would allow that, but also knowledge and creativity to think outside the box would give you power. Having good social connections would give you power because you can utilize the people in your community. I will have to do a video on 8 forms of capital, and that might be some ways we can look at establishing power in our 7th generation warfare. But politics refers to the distribution of power. And in 7th generation warfare, we're looking not to distribute that, today amongst peers or amongst other people in society. We're looking to distribute that power over time. So whereas 3rd generation warfare focuses on the power dynamics that are in place today, you can think of, people as very tall mountains, some people as minuscule hills, some people as having no power. They could be the prairies or whatever, the flatlands. They're looking at a topographical map of where the power lies across society today. We want our goal, and we're not even really concerning ourselves with the power of others, other than to know whether or not they can do us harm or do our children harm. We're looking more at the power distribution of our family over time. What we certainly do not want is for our power of our descendants to drop off, for our kids to have less capabilities than we have. At minimum, we should be looking to keep it even, but really there is no even. There's either up or down. So we're looking for a constant upward trajectory. You could say, well, let's just go large and let's shoot it to the moon. The problem with exponential growth or any bell curve, or curve that goes J curve, they talk about population on Earth has just exploded. and it's not sustainable, that there's going to be a population decline. You want steady growth, in business. If your business goes up really quick, it's going to come down really quick. So steady growth in the distribution of power over time in our families is a good way to do it. Because you could have a kid, you could teach them to be a great entrepreneur. You could also and make material financial wealth, and you could also teach them the importance of having a family. But they're going to start losing some of the values, and maybe they start prioritizing material wealth over the valuing the family. So maybe they actually work a little too much and don't spend enough time with their family, in which case their kids grow up seeing their dad being a workaholic or being after business success and not after the success of their own children. And so the kids either grow up resentful, or the kids grow up following in that father's footsteps, and don't actually learn the value of family, and then that generation might become completely neglectful of their family, and then you crash. So politics for seventh generation warfare would be the distribution of power over time in our family, and the dynamic interactions, both cooperative and competitive. I don't know. I mean, certainly there can be fun competition within family to harness skills and things, but really we're looking at cooperative means of getting our children to harness their power. Policy refers to the conscious objectives established in the political process. So whereas politics is kind of more abstract, I think they're saying that the policy is more written in stone or written in paper. Like what are the laws and rules, and what is actually verbally expressed. People with political power might make policy that obscures what their actual motivations are, or goes around and hides because they want to maintain the power, so they don't, there can be all kinds of weird things in politics. The policy aims that are the motive for any group in war should also be the foremost determinants of its conduct. Yeah, so your conduct in war is driven by what your policy says. And certainly in seventh generation war, I'm expressing basically all these videos are the policy of my seventh generation war, and my conduct is hopefully very reflective of the content I am putting out in these videos. I am coming up with these ideas, trying to put them into practice, and when I do actually put them into practice, that is the actual conduct of my seventh generation war. As the policy aims of war may vary from resistance against aggression to the unconditional surrender of an enemy government, so should the application of violence vary in accordance with those aims. So they're just talking about how much force you use in war, in third generation war or any other violent war. But this is not a violent war. But you can certainly throttle it up and throttle it down. Seventh generation war, you can put more effort into it or pull back, and you can redirect where your effort is going. So, and I think this will be certainly more applicable as subsequent generations start to refine the process, because I don't know what's going to stick. I'm just throwing all these ideas out there, and my children and grandchildren growing up will be able to be in a better position of reflecting on what my seventh generation policy was and how that affected my conduct as an actual adult or leader of the family. and they'll be able to actually see what the outcomes of that policy was and be able to adjust it. Of course, we may also have to adjust our policy objectives to accommodate our chosen means. This means we must not establish goals outside our capabilities. That's important. Don't don't think you're going to raise your kid to be president of the United States or something, because if you're not already politically connected or something like that, and super wealthy and have a lot of political influence as a father, as a parent, chances are your children are not going to make it very far in that realm. Nor do you really want them to, because that world seems horribly toxic. It is important to recognize that many political problems cannot be solved by military means. Yeah, which is why we're fighting 7th generation warfare, because war just begets more war, and unless you kill everyone, there's going to be people who are pissed off and want to kill you. War tends to take its own course as it unfolds. Yep. We should recognize that war is not an inanimate instrument, but an animate force which may likely have unintended consequences that may change the political situation. Yes. Which is interesting, because generally I'm more conspiratorial minded and think that war is brought about by the people who have the power in order to better serve the people with power. But be interesting to see, to really understand how often it backfires on them and they lose their political power. To say that war is an extension of politics and policy is to say that war is strictly a political phenomenon. It also contains social, cultural, psychological, and other elements. 7th generation warfare certainly does. Social, how your children's peers are coming into the influence. Cultural, what the culture of the society at the time and how that affects. So, me today planning 7th generation warfare, 3 generations removed, because you should be looking at least 3 generations. I have no idea what the culture is going to look like. That everyone everyone might be gay and babies might be made in laboratories for all I know. I can't possibly fathom what the cultural context is going to look like in 2070 or something like that. So, and psychological and other elements. So psychological, there's a lot going on in our heads, and trying to get in the heads of our children. To do that, you have to understand a little bit of human psychology in general, and how the human mind works, what its peaks and troughs, pros and cons, fears and joys are, and those sort of things. These can also exert a strong influence on the conduct of war, as well as on war's usefulness for solving political problems. Yes. When the policy motive of war is extreme, such as the destruction of enemy government, then war's natural military tendency towards destruction will coincide with the political aim. Yeah. So, if you want to completely destroy a government, you're going to wage a pretty brutal war. And there will tend to be few political restrictions on military conduct of war. On the other hand, the more limited the policy motive, the more the military tendency towards destruction may be at variance with the motive, and more likely political consideration will restrict the application of military force. Yeah, so if you just wanted to go in and, as a military, you wanted to, maybe there was a terrorist cell in a country or something, maybe you start with the objective of just outing that terrorist cell from the country, and so you're not focused on the government. But when the government either sides with the terrorists or obstructs your military action, well, then you might change your policy and say, okay, government, we're going for you too. Um, but with seventh generation warfare, the policy is doing that which is peaceful, but that which will secure the exercise of your children's will. So it's really, I don't particularly see anything you believe could further your brighten your children's future, so long as it's not violent, I think is on the table. So I think the only real question is how much emphasis or effort you put into it, how much of your life you devote to it. Commanders must recognize that since military action must serve policy, these political restrictions on military action may be perfectly correct. At the same time, military leaders have the responsibility to advise the political leadership when the limitations imposed on military action jeopardize the military ability to accomplish its assigned mission. So this is interesting, and when hopefully my children pick up the flag of seventh generation warfare, I will be a military commander, hopefully. And I'll be in the position to advise them on their conduct for their children. I mean, I'll be interacting with their children too, but I'll be in a better position to advise them. And when their actions, whether they think that those actions are part of seventh generation warfare or not, when their actions are going against their stated goal, if they wanted to be a seventh generation warfare fighter, their stated goal of trying to secure their children's will, then I'm in a position to advise them on that. So, perhaps a child takes up, some sort of substance use, is consuming alcohol in a way that is detrimental, or I would be deeming detrimental to their children. Their children are seeing daddy, drunk and out of his wits or whatever. Then I would let them know this is not a good policy for seventh generation warfare. And furthermore, you're jeopardizing your mission. There are two ways to use military force to impose our will on the enemy. The first is to make the enemy helpless to resist us by physically destroying military capabilities. The aim is to annihilate permanently or temporarily of the enemy's military power. This has historically been called a strategy of annihilation, though it does not necessarily require the physical annihilation of military force. Instead, it requires the enemy's incapacitation as a viable military threat, and thus can also be called a strategy of incapacitation. The only way I could see this becoming applicable in seventh generation warfare is if your family gets so powerful. Like, think of the most powerful family in the world, the Clintons or the Kennedys, or maybe some Saudi royal family, or the royal family in England, a family like that really there's nothing that could stand in their way. If they will something, they can make it happen because the family's so powerful. That's so far removed from my family's current situation that I don't think it really deserves me pondering it too much. But my general position on it is that that's not a great place to be. I think that's when things start to come apart, because you need that resistance. You need people pushing back on you. You need other people's wills actually able to restrict yours in some way. You need that pressure on you in order to hone the resolve of your own will. if you are such a powerful family, you can literally do whatever you want. I think you will start to lose touch with what your will is. But I don't know. That's if you have any thoughts on that, please leave them in the comments. We use force in this way when we seek ultimate political objectives, such as the overthrow of enemy leadership. We may also use this strategy in pursuit of more limited political objectives if we believe the enemy will continue to resist as long as any means to do so remains. The second approach is to convince the enemy that acceptance of our terms will be less painful than continuing to resist. This is a strategy of erosion. Using military force to erode the enemy's leadership will. In such a strategy, we use military force to raise the cost of resistance higher than the enemy is willing to pay. We use force in this manner in pursuit of limited political goals that we believe the enemy leadership will ultimately be willing to accept. So, I mean, on a personal level, in daily life or in business life especially, just keep hammering at the thing you want that's standing in your way and just eroding it. I mean, that's certainly applicable. Struggling at this moment to think of how the strategy of erosion applies to 7th generation warfare, but I mean, certainly if there is a tendency in a family that has existed for multiple generations. We talked about alcohol, so perhaps, alcoholism runs in the family. Perhaps the strategy of erosion would say, don't just try to cut out. I think you can cut out alcohol, though, so maybe this is a bad example. Like or some sort of mental illness, or something that runs in the family for generations to generation. Just erode away at the problem. Don't necessarily try to make a drastic change all in one generation, but just whatever that underlying thing is, that underlying enemy to your 7th generation war that keeps trying to poke its way up and take the people's will. Just slowly do away with it. Find its critical vulnerabilities time after time and get rid of it that way. That would be a way of erosion. But I think we could frame that a better way. I think instead of strategy of erosion, we could talk about in 7th generation warfare a strategy of like construction or something. Erosion, you think of like a mountainside eroding away, or sand being pulled off a beach, or something like that. In my mind, 7th generation warfare is about laying down stones, like walking stones, or a path or a road, like a Roman road, which was made of big square cobblestones or bricks. And it just, each generation, you're just, putting down a few more bricks, making a nice, clear, clean path that's easy to walk on. And, everyone can get a little bit further. And so it's a strategy of construction rather than a strategy of annihilation or a strategy of erosion. And I think that's the beauty of 7th generation warfare. Anyways, that ends this section. War is an active policy. We're getting into some heavier stuff, it seems like. So I hope that made sense. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. This is 7th generation warfare. I'm your current host, John Nelson. Have a good night.